Hello, everybody, and welcome to this new series. It's called Still Running. It's a project I've been wanting to do for a while now. And I'm here with my guest, Angela Steele,
Hi, Andrea.
which I will ask to introduce herself in a little while. But let me tell you a little bit about this project. This project gathers insights from well-being professionals about what truly sustains people and performance under pressure. And the goal is to bring together real world voices, practical experience, and patterns that that leaders and organizations need to understand now. And it's connected to well-being, it's connected to personal experience and expertise, to system, to people. Because I believe with all my heart that an organization's most valuable assets are and will remain people. Welcome, Angela. Happy to have you.
Pleasure
Thank
to
you
be.
for joining me.
Thanks for inviting
And
me.
yeah, before I ask you to introduce yourself and share a little bit of your background with our audience, can you tell me what made you accept this project? What makes you say yes when I send you a message out of the blue?
um, I think we were saying before we pressed record that talking about that leap that you took to decide to do this project, and for me, it's always a bit outside of my comfort zone to talk about myself or be in the spotlight, or and when your request came in, I think it was linked to something I posted that I felt quite strongly about. And so immediately I kind of felt a connection with you. So I thought, yeah, this could be interesting.
Thank you very much. I looked at your answers. For those of you who are not aware, these answers will be part of a book, first in a series, and it talks about real life experience, people who do work within corporations, organizations, with groups of people, and care about well-being and performance, and care about moving the system forward, because as it is right now, it definitely needs change. Tell me a little bit about yourself, please, so that our audience can get to know you better.
Okay, so I'm the founder of SuperWellness. We're a company that specialises in workplace wellbeing. Started the business in 2011, so quite some time ago, and wellbeing's evolved hugely in that time. It's unrecognisable what it is today. My career before that was in the corporate world. I used to work in marketing, then retrained in nutrition. So I had a real passion for what nutrition can do for our performance and how we feel. And so that's why I started SuperWellness. Originally, it was all about nutrition. And then the years went by, and the business was building. And then COVID came along, and it completely changed what our corporate clients were really looking for with wellbeing. It was not so often about health per se, but more about culture and how can we support employees working in a hybrid way, and how can we support our managers, etc. So I studied for an MSc in organisational psychology at Birkbeck, just to get the view of what the gaps I had and all the things I was missing. And that was really helpful. And since then, we've kind of really gone down that direction of developing services that are really around helping organisations to create compassionate, high-performance cultures.
Thank you. It's very impressive. And I know you do a lot of research.
Yes.
Can you tell me? I know it was not part of our questions, but I'm really keen on knowing more about that, and I'm guessing our audience as well, because it's a different thing when it's your experience, but also supported by real life research.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think I caught the bug during my master's. At the time, I was very lucky to have a great supervisor, Professor Gail Kinman, and my project was focused on wellbeing leads and their experience. And really found out what we kind of knew already working with our clients, is how challenging that role is, very limited career paths, and limited qualification choices, that type of thing. Also, sometimes challenging to get the ear of the senior leaders and to get budget and just to have the power and the support to do what they need to do. So, and that was a qualitative piece of research. So I just love the conversations with people and just the depth of information that you get from those conversations, really. And so, how long? 3 years later, we found in SuperWellness that the missing link was really the view of the senior leader, because we're often working with the wellbeing lead or the HR manager, and often the budgets get cut or things kind of happen beyond their control, and kept coming back to the senior leader. And this question of, well, what did senior leaders really think? What's driving their decisions? So that's why we decided to look into that a little bit more. And Professor Gail Kinman agreed to support the research as well. So we've completed phase 1, which is the qualitative part. We've interviewed 12 senior leaders, from MDs, senior HR leaders, health and safety leaders. So we've got really good range of perspectives from different sectors and organisations as well. And we're just about to start the quantitative part of that research.
Thank you. I'm very keen on research. I have a doctorate in conflict analysis and resolution and organizational dynamics. So I studied how people learn together through and how they connect and learn better in groups. So for me, group work is so important. But you're right, getting the buy-in of the senior management when well-being is still a buzzword. I know it's getting better, but it's still something outside what we call organizational performance and so on. Research will take us one step further to showing that well-being is important and people do perform better when they're actually challenged, safe enough to contradict and challenge assumption. And of course, we are talking about instructing managers to deal with this. If they are aware, a big part of this is awareness. If they are aware of it, they can actually deal with it. But a lot of the issues happening right now is because they like shrug and say, I don't know what we are talking about.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next piece of your research. I think it will be very helpful and will be a great service to organizations everywhere.
Thank you.
Your replies to the questions I said were really impressive, and I wrote it down, by the way. I'm gonna read it. It's something that I was really impressed. And you said something about a new benchmark. You found a new benchmark for what good actually feels like. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, yes.
Because that's very important.
That was the question about the where I talked about the fast I did in Thailand.
Yes.
I've actually just finished doing a 7-day water fast, and that's not to show off, but I've actually got chronic pain issues, and I've got to a point where I was so desperate to deal with the pain that even a 7-day water fast didn't sort of seem too bad. So at the time, that was the first time I did something like that, and it was in Thailand. It wasn't really initially for any health reason. It was just out of curiosity and wanting to experiment. And so I did this fast in a very nice environment. And I felt amazing at the end of it. I was in my early 30s at the time, really high energy. I was running up hills practically. And even though I was quite young then, I often had aches and pains and, just didn't feel at my best. So it was quite an eye-opener to see that actually it is possible to reverse that and to feel fantastic. So it did set a new benchmark, and I think generally it made me question the things that we think are set in stone and that we can't change, we don't have control over. There's always things beyond what we know that we might be able to draw on. So yeah, it's good learning.
Yeah, curiosity is key. And for me, who had a burnout and nearly killed herself during it, because I developed an autoimmune disease and had chronic pain for years, it really impressed me, and it showed me that it is possible. Because a lot of the things don't happen because we don't believe them possible. We set them in stones. It is what it is. I've heard that a lot because it's always been this way, and it is what it is, and we can do nothing about it, not even trying to figure out a different perspective. Do you think personal curiosity plays a part in people who do engage in bettering themselves, in learning more about well-being, in changing organizations? Can this be a personal input, or is this something that organizations can contribute to?
I think that's a great question. I think it's a big contributor because you always have to question beyond what you think you know already, and yeah, what we don't know is the most dangerous blind spot, isn't it? So I think that attitude of actually always seeking beyond what we know already, particularly in workplace wellbeing, because it's a sector that keeps evolving. We keep, I think, just realizing more and more things. I've seen workplace wellbeing since the pandemic, go from a focus more on awareness, which might have suited that time, actually supporting people around their health and awareness, but then realizing that wasn't enough. And actually, what's the impact, long term? How do you measure that? And then sort of having a little bit of a backlash, I think, generally in wellbeing, where companies have kind of almost taken a step back to say, hang on a minute, we don't need to be doing all these webinars. We need to reconsider what's really going to make an impact. And the focus now, I think, is a return to the fundamentals. So we're seeing a lot of interest, for instance, in the management standards and, just actually ensuring that people's workload is manageable and that they have the safety to speak up and, ask questions. And all the fundamentals of work, really, what makes work, I'd say, enjoyable, preferably, but something that people can cope with. So yes, I think that it really needs people with that mindset of looking beyond what they know already. So I think, if you take a qualification in workplace wellbeing, at this point, probably 3 years down the line, there'll be a lot of things that, new things actually to learn and, integrate in the way that you work. So.
That's true, and I'm a great advocate of well-being champions. And I think it's a bit more than a job. It's also a vocation, and a lot of the time is based on personal experience. Those who go that way have had something happen to them that changed their opinion about the whole well-being route, and basically the cost pressure and workload and toxic environments have on their health, on their relationships. And I think the world is changing, because before was like, I don't know what to do about it. I can't. I need to pay the bills. Now people get more vocal and start to change more. But it's still a bit hesitant, because people who do speak up are looked at funny. And you shared about your queen bee moment, which I imagine was pretty uncomfortable. Can you share more about that?
Yeah. that was back in my days working in the IT industry, and which was very male dominant then. And I think the cultures in organisations have changed a lot, even in, you know, those, what is it now? Gosh, must be 20 years, coming up for 20 years. And that was in my days. I was a marketing director at the time in a fairly small SME in IT, and I very frequently had run-ins with the sales director, and I stood my ground. So he was a very dominant character, and expected. I don't know if there was, you know, a gender part to this or not, but definitely expected me to fall into line, and there was an undercurrent of he was the superior, you know, authority, but I wouldn't have any of that, and I'd stand my ground and actually push back even more, because I that sort of thing I think triggers something within me. So I was always very forthright with him, and I heard that, you know, he referred to me as the queen bee to other employees, but that was quite a tough time actually, of, you know, behind scenes really questioning myself and thinking, am I being too assertive, or, you know, there's a real sort of tussle. I think for women, even now, you know, that there's often that tension between feeling that you have to be a nice person and standing your ground. So
I agree, and Queen Bee sounds quite empowering from the outside, but nobody tells you about the feelings you have on the inside. I am Romanian by origin, by the way, and sometimes I'm quite blunt because I'm focused on solving the issue and getting the process moving forward rather than playing nice and nurturing everybody's feelings. Because look, this is work. We're not doing this for fun. We're doing it for results. We're doing this for a paycheck. So I was kind of in that mindset, and I've been told off because you need to pay more attention. And I was a bit surprised. Of course, imposter syndrome kicked in, and I was like, I need to do what? Change the way I am, change the way I behave, rather change the way I speak, I would say. But again, if you're focused on results, you will have a mindset that drives results. But again, people in organizations say, you know what? We expect standard. But well, if you expect standard, then what gets done? But the high performers are the ones who have ideas and who move everything forward.
And there's a danger of being fake. If you know, are told not to be yourself, and then you might add sort of embellishments to your message to, you know, come across a little bit softer, but it won't necessarily come across as authentic, because, you know, everyone approaches things in a different way. So
I agree, and I think that that's a contradiction, and not many people see it. Are we focusing on results? That's the slogan, right? Or focusing on results, on getting things done, on fixing, on performance, on power moves, or are we focusing on getting the message kind of diluted across and making nice? And I connected very much to what you said about psychological safety being a little bit misunderstood. Because people do need challenges. Can you elaborate on that? Because I think your perspective is really valuable.
I'm quite passionate about that concept, actually. I think obviously psychological safety is spoken about a lot in wellbeing, and quite rightly so. You know, it's a really important aspect of wellbeing, that people are encouraged to speak up and, you know, participate in meetings, be authentic, and say, you know, say their part and be included, and they're not afraid to do so, or to speak up if there's an issue, or you know, without repercussions. I think that is really important, and that's the central concept of psychological safety. But I think where it can go wrong is that sometimes it can be interpreted as, well, I can say whatever I like and you have to let me speak up, it's my right. And, you know, I'm bringing, excuse me, I'm bringing my whole self to work, and, you know, I can say what I like, essentially. And I think the effect that this sometimes has is that managers then don't quite know how to deal with this. And there's this fear and this paralysis that managers then feel, because actually they're also responsible for performance, not just for the well-being of their employees. So part of their role, and a really important part of their role, is to set boundaries and to be able to push back if an employee's behaviour is impinging on others' well-being or on others' performance, because actually it's, you know, maybe affecting the flow of the meeting, you know, and actually, you know, one person might be taking over for their, because they're, you know, for their psychological safety, but that's actually overshadowing other people. So actually the manager has a role to play there to set boundaries around that, and to really put the message across that psychological safety is necessarily has to have boundaries to it, because you've got the interests of the individual versus the interests of the group, and you have to balance the two. And so I think what it's doing sometimes is just paralyzing managers in, you know, their ability to push back on that and manage the team in the best way for the team and for the outcomes for the organisation. And then I think another related aspect is this idea of being stretched in a constructive way and being challenged in a constructive way. And I think sometimes with well-being, we focus so much on stress and the, you know, not putting people under stress or avoiding stress. And that is a real issue for sure. But at the same time, our well-being also depends on having a sense of purpose and growing as individuals. I think personal growth and, you know, going to work and feeling fulfilled and perhaps learning or having a sense of achievement, you know, those are really important factors in workplace well-being. And I think sometimes that's neglected, and instead we're just focusing on making sure that people are comfortable. And I think, again, that's one of the pitfalls of some of the ways that well-being can be interpreted sometimes.
Yes, it does make sense, and I do believe sometimes manager could have quite an ingrained role, because there are in a sandwich. You have people underneath you who you have to manage, and you have to you're accountable for, and then there is pressure from above, where, you know, decisions are made. Sometimes, yes, they are explained. Sometimes the communication is not so great. So in this sandwich, managers need to find their role, their purpose, their own well-being. And let's say it outright, there is not much support on that.
No.
The trainings that are given right now are mainly, you know, for organizational purposes, for systems and stuff like that. But you need different skills. And in my opinion, well-being is a bit of a misnomer, in the sense that it should be embedded in everyday reality and in a part of the performance discussion. But because it's so reactive, it comes as a result of burnout, of stress,
Yes.
prolonged stress, pressure, pain, chronically ill people.
Yeah.
It became a reaction to that, instead of something that can organically grow and help organizations perform better. And managers are so important in a layer in that perspective.
Yeah.
But again, it's kind of new. What do you do when there is a fire? First, you put out the fire, and then you check if the walls are still standing. So what's happening right now, and I've noticed a lot in all my former jobs and my consultant business, is that people are putting out fires.
Mm-hmm. That's a great
So
analogy.
yeah, instead of looking at the whole thing, because change, before change can take place, it's painful. Because change means you have to do with two systems at the same time. You have to do your everyday day job and test something new. You don't know if it works, it will fail, it takes effort that you don't have resources at a certain point you don't have. So yes, change is good, but in the long term, in the short term, it's kind of painful.
Yeah.
So everybody postpones it. And I am a perfect example. I didn't worry about my well-being until I got sick.
Yeah. It's always the way.
Um, one very important thing you said in your reviews and in your answers, and is you said something about doing less, not more, because change only happens when well-being is aligned to organizational reality. And I
Yeah.
think that's something most organizations miss, because there is a plan and we do have to do the plan, and then they forget to actually get in touch with the people doing the plan and doing the activities,
Mm-hmm.
and those people are impacted sometimes negatively by those activities, and there is no feedback loop. So it creates resentment, it creates a lot of unsafe places, because I may be free to talk, but if nothing is being done with what I talk about,
Yeah,
at a
exactly.
certain point, I will get tired and stop sharing, stop talking. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think those feedback systems can backfire if they're not acted upon. And so I've lost my train of thought. So we're talking about doing less, weren't we? Not more. So I think there's, like I was saying earlier, there's been this progression from since the pandemic of, I think that's when it started, doing lots of initiatives and doing lots of health promotion and awareness sessions. And most organisations have been on that journey, and they'll have an EAP, they'll have counselling, they'll have a health promotion program, and they'll have several other things as well. And I think this turns into quite a difficult, huge task to actually make these different initiatives coherent. And you get to a point where you're not going to throw everything out and start again, so you're a little bit stuck with what you've got and where do we go from now. So I think one of the big challenges of organizations now is to understand really what their key priority is, and it can be quite confusing because there's lots of challenges and areas that you can focus on, and there's lots of trends as well. So you'll be hearing about different messages about the focus on the menopause and the focus on men's health and lots of different things, and all are important, but they might not be the priority for the organization right now. And so for every organization, I think the challenge is just working out what's the big thing that we need to focus on this year. And ideally, it needs to build on what we have already. And, there needs to be that progression that we keep building on what we have. Otherwise, we're just creating this massive behemoth of activities and initiatives. And employees don't even know that they're there, or they, stop using them because they're just confused by just the profusion of choice. So some of the people I interviewed said this really clearly. It came up time and time again in the interviews that it takes a surprisingly long amount of time to make a difference with wellbeing, and to put in place an initiative, a real impactful initiative in wellbeing takes a long time. And actually, if you put one or two things in place in a year, that's quite good. And I think the reason for that is, when we think about making a change in terms of wellbeing, you think about it on paper, and it all makes sense. You've got the strategy, and we kind of, okay, that's it, we've got the strategy. But there's so much more to it than that. And you were saying this earlier, all the different commercial pressures and different steps that are involved in actually embedding a wellbeing initiative or a wellbeing change effectively. And one of the biggest challenges is consistency and reach. And that was those words came up, which I thought were really useful, because when you think about an organisation with multiple teams, multiple managers, what's often happening is that team's experience will highly depend on the manager. And if the manager's really on board with wellbeing and on board with the strategy, and then they'll have a great experience. But then it might be very variable across other teams. So the big challenge is actually getting all the managers to be on the same page and have an understanding, a real practical understanding of the wellbeing strategy and what it means for how they operate and how they manage their team. And reach is very important as well, because you've got large organizations with offline employees or very remote, isolated sites, for example, or global organizations, and you have to make sure that your wellbeing strategy actually reaches all those far points of your organization. And if they don't, then there's a sense of unfairness, and that again can backfire even more. So yes, I think it's not under, and I think often a lot is expected of organizations. And I often see on LinkedIn, for example, it's quite negative. Organizations should be doing more and they're not doing enough, and employers aren't doing enough. But I think there's perhaps we could do with a bit more understanding, I think, of the challenges that businesses do face and the reality of it. And I think that would improve the quality of the conversation if we were coming from that place of understanding. And for organisations, obviously, to understand, what embedding wellbeing truly means. But I do think we could do with perhaps more understanding generally.
Thank you for that. I actually think we could do with more conversations. Yes. Everywhere, because right now it's a missed opportunity. There aren't that many conversations, and it gets interrupted somewhere in the middle manager lines, just because operational reality. There is no time, there is no space, and people do react only when something breaks. It's a mindset that needs to change fast. But as people with our nervous system that is very old and reacts very slow, we make do. It is not broken, so let's not fix it. But it's not efficient either. Do you think this can be done internally with a third-party external intervention, with C-suite buy-in, or a combination of this? What would be the best way to think about, to approach such a strategy?
I think a combination is quite beneficial. I'm not saying that because we're a wellbeing provider, but I do think it can be quite hard for an organisation to self-analyse, because you're in it, you're experiencing it day to day. Everyone's coming from a different perspective. So certainly having different stakeholders from within the organization, that's important. But then, how do you bring together all those perspectives, and how do you bring them together into one approach that everyone agrees with? That's where often a third party can be quite useful in terms of brokering that conversation and facilitating that conversation, but also bringing that external perspective on things that you might not even be aware of within your culture. For example, when we run audits and we do focus groups, we'll note down some of the language that's used in the focus group, and we'll feed that back to the client, and there'll definitely be a certain language that's spoken in different organizations, and that says a lot about their culture, but they're probably not aware of that, or that can give quite a useful insight beyond what the kind of standard take on what their culture is. There's often actually quite a gap between what an organization wants their culture to be and then how everyone interprets it at every level of the organization.
That's true. So I participated in a study with a big organization, thousands of employees, and they got served two different surveys. One was for the general population and one was for the managers. And there was a big gap in perception between what the managers thought the reality is and what the regular employees thought. So that's the gap that can only be bridged through discussion, through joining the two groups, and giving them a common purpose and a common direction. Because up there on the hill, the air smells really nice, but down here in the sewers where the work is done, well, it's kind of smelly and not so nice. So how can we bring the two at the same table? And one very important component that's useful to speak of is cost.
Mm-hmm.
When you do something like this, well, this cost is not immediate. It's not the same thing as changing the system. You have 6 months, you have a project, you have milestones, you have return on investment, you have clear data, analytics, statistics. Well, when you're talking about well-being, about measuring performance across an organization, well, the time is longer and some things are not exactly measurable. How do you sell well-being, and how do you make the language fit into for the organization to buy into such important strategies?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's such a tough area, metrics, and everyone's scratching their head over metrics, to be honest with you. When I interviewed senior leaders, they were all really saying the same thing. They were saying we need metrics because we do need a case. We need to be able to justify our investment. We've got finite resources, and if we invest in this, then we don't invest in that. So we do need metrics. However, a lot of them were saying what I rely on personally is the energy in the room. And, when I walk into one of the offices and I can feel if people have a spring in their step, or I can feel if the energy is really heavy and there's conflict. And that a lot of them mention this vibe, which obviously you can't capture on a chart. So that's very difficult. So, looking at metrics themselves, I think there isn't a holy grail metric that suits every organization. And it's really about finding the metrics that suit each organization, and that's going to be unique to that organization. So, and that's going to take work to actually get to the bottom of that. But it's interesting because it throws up a whole range of very useful questions for the organization. And I think just even looking at their business strategy beyond wellbeing, what are their business objectives? And if they can tie wellbeing into their business objectives, I think they've got their metrics. So only they can say, what their business objectives are. And then it's about, well, how can we leverage, our wellbeing strategy to be aligned with those business objectives that we have. I think that's the best way to get, start from the top, really. And then you have something meaningful.
Yeah, but of course, there are a lot of variables because we're talking about people, and people are very, very different. And we're talking about different generations as well. So the expectations of a millennial will be different than Gen Z or whatever the name is right now, because there are so many of them. There are cultural gaps. Of course, I used to work across the three continents to align processes, and Asian people work in a certain way, European a certain way, Americans a certain way. So considering in Europe we have so many differences. You have French, you have Germans, you have Spanish. So they all operate in a certain way. They expect different language. So bringing all that together is a project in itself, let alone taking personal preferences into consideration. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm a big believer in this, and it does make sense. But again, taking the numbers out, I sometimes I understand why some companies don't even bother, and it's like a battle uphill. And with the emergence of AI and the fear that people have around AI and it will get our jobs and stuff like that. When fear enters the room, all talks about well-being are off, because people care about their jobs, their revenue, their numbers, and well-being takes falls back at the end of the list.
Yeah.
Which, in my opinion, is the worst thing that can happen, because once well-being is off the list, motivation, engagement, and performance are decreased. So the numbers decrease automatically. And there are trends, there is research, and still, like you said before, people said the energy is off. How can you mitigate that in a discussion? How would you address that?
So to address the metrics themselves, or sort of
this fear, because the fear, if it appears in a discussion, even when people seem very calm and relaxed, behind the numbers there is fear of change. And introducing not a new, but something new in the discussion, because well-being is not new; it's just a new name now on the scene. Introducing a new variable in the discussion means rocking the system. Good or bad, the system is functional. Once you introduce a new variable, obviously some things will break. And again, the effort will go into fixing them and then working on the system. So there is reluctance, but behind it, there is fear. And it's a bit different than the fear of introducing a new system, because this is structural change.
Yes.
It's obvious, and the research shows, and the many case studies done, it's obvious change is necessary. But again, who am I? And again, imposter syndrome showing up. Who am I to take on this big challenge? And I need to fail a lot before succeeding. Do you see that in the conversations you have with leaders? Do you sense that fear behind it, and how do you address it?
Around well-being and the fear of the I suppose unintended consequences and there are many if it's in the wrong way, it can be interpreted as well-being washing, and it can break trust, and so I think there are pitfalls to it, and I think partly there's fear and there's apathy. like you were saying before, it's that, well, the system kind of still works, we're still running as a business and people are still turning up to work. So there's a form of apathy, which I think comes from paralysis, because actually there's lots of strands to be dealing with, lots of things to juggle, and it's one more ball that we would have to juggle, and we just haven't got the capacity to do that. So there's this kind of apathy, because we don't know how to approach it. We don't have the capacity. And then I do think there's an element of fear. I think with some organisations, they feel that perhaps over the last few years they've invested in wellbeing and they haven't seen the payoff.
Yeah.
It hasn't paid off. And that's because there was a little bit of a rush into wellbeing across the board, I think, actually experimenting with different initiatives and doing lots of health promotion and quite scattergun approaches to wellbeing. And that's because the knowledge at the time was quite low. I think we've come a long way since then. And in the senior leaders position, you can't really afford to do that much, to actually invest money that could be invested elsewhere in something that doesn't show a return. So I do think there's that element of having had their fingers burnt, and actually now, we were talking earlier about curiosity. I think a lot of it depends on that senior leader having the curiosity to keep exploring and think, well, actually, what are the best approaches now that things have moved on, but and not to retreat in that idea that, well, wellbeing didn't work for us and that's it. So I think mostly the fear probably hinges on that fear of just not seeing a return, really. But otherwise, I think that you could say that fear drives a lot of senior leaders to actually consider wellbeing, because actually it plays such a big part now in the organisation's reputation. I think a lot of senior leaders are recognising that if they don't integrate workplace wellbeing, then they will be left behind ultimately. So fear's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword, I'd say.
Which brings me to my before last question, and that touches a sensitive point in what you wrote as well. How do you keep showing up when it's hard? And when you're going to fail? Because failure is learning. So if I expect to learn, I expect to fail. I don't remember successes, but I do remember the times I failed, because I tried over and over, and that cemented my understanding and brought new things into my life. Uncomfortable at first, but then, of course, amazing things. And you wrote something beautiful. I would like you to share that with our audience. How do you keep showing up, especially when it's hard?
I think did I say about putting one foot in front of the other? Because that's where I would.
And keeping awake at night.
So it's not sort of any magical formula or anything. It's funny, I was watching something about the Chinese sign, the ox. So I'm sign of the ox, which is very descriptive of how I am, which is plodding along, one foot in front of the other, nothing can stop me, carrying heavy loads, and that's sort of just part of who I am. And I guess that's my coping strategy, is to just take the next step and put one foot in front of the other, and try not to think too much beyond what I can control or what might happen, so I don't tend to do that too much, but just really focus. I'm very much a doer, so very much focusing on what is within my control and what can I do, and actually those really hard situations, they bring out the best in us. make us really creative, and you kind of have to come up with a solution when things are looking really bleak. And so I always, now I've been through countless occasions of, bleak moments and things feeling really tough. And I know that things always get better and they always change and things are just temporary. So you've just got to keep showing up. And that's actually a bit of a motto that I say to myself, is just keep showing up. And there'll be days where, you feel you do really badly and nothing's working. But the fact you showed up kind of keeps building. And that's what matters. If you give up, then that's the only failure really that there is.
I quite agree, and I think it's a triage system as well, because we're working with the nervous system. Even we were talking about organization, a lot of moving parts, but people will be people, and a lot of them are frozen and stop being curious.
Yeah.
So then everything stops. Life becomes meaningless. Jobs become meaningless. So what's the point? But how do you keep an organization like that alive? Well, the more people are curious, the more organization can grow and keep on failing, keep on showing up, even if they don't get immediate return on investment,
Yeah,
especially when you're talking about well-being and so many moving parts.
exactly. And
Thank you so
yeah.
much, Angela. Thank you
Oh,
so much for today. Is there anything else you would like to address our audience before we finish this?
there's nothing I can think of off the top of my head. I think we've covered so much, but I think I would just say that workplace well-being, that the word curiosity is probably the key word here, to keep being curious. And it's still a sector that's in evolution, that is not settled, and it can be tough, I think, for everyone involved in that sector. It can be tough for senior leaders who don't have the metrics they need. It can be tough for the wellbeing leads who don't have the easiest of careers, and they have often the weight of the employees' health on their shoulders and very few resources. It can be really tough all round. But I do think that I can see the progress happening every year, and I can see things becoming clearer, and getting to a point a little bit like, I think, the trajectory of health and safety, where it went from something that was quite undefined and a nice to have perhaps, to something that is very well defined, and there's very clear guidelines, and actually organisations are very clear on what needs to happen. And I think well-being will go in that direction as well. But I think there's probably a number of years still to get to that point. And a lot of it will happen through trial and error. And what's interesting is just to see the same thing happening, or the same perception across all of our clients at one given time, hearing the same sort of feedback and about the stage that they're at. So, it's knowing also that you're not alone. If you're, a senior leader and you feel like you're not doing enough, or you haven't sussed it out, then you can be sure that most other organisations will be in the same place. But I do think it's headed in a promising direction. So.
Absolutely, and we learn and live better in groups. We are built this way, so rather than me fighting on my own, I would rather have a group that mirrors me and shows me different perspectives, so I can learn, not by myself, but learn from other people's shared experience, which takes me to the goal a lot faster. Thank you so much. It was amazing talking to you. All the this will be online, and your responses will be part of the chapter of Still Running, which will show up sometimes in the next year because it's a big project. Thank you so much again.
So much.
Um,
It's really been a
yeah, yeah. Well-being is an ongoing conversation,
pleasure.
and thank you for your contribution to that. If people want to connect with you, where will they find you?
So you can email me at angela@superwellness.co.uk. And if you'd like to know more about what we do, where our website is superwellness.co.uk.
So for anybody who wants to contact Angela, she's great. She has great experience in organizations. I know she has a certified course on well-being with great results and different cohorts, and she's doing research as well. So feel free to contact Angela at any time. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thanks so much, Andrea.